It looked like a completely normal parcel drop, the kind you see on any quiet street in Britain every single day. A white van pulls up outside a modest, semi-detached house in West Derby. One man walks to the door, dressed convincingly in a courier's uniform, holding a package. But this was no delivery. As the door opened, the disguise was dropped. 3 other men, masked in balaclavas and armed for war, stormed out of the van behind him. What happened next lasted just 4 minutes, but the consequences would ripple through the criminal underworld for years. By the time they left, a man was soaked in his own blood, slashed to the bone, and £1 million worth of high-purity cocaine was gone. The stash house did not belong to a low-level dealer. It was the property of one of Merseyside's most violent and feared crime syndicates, the Huyton Firm. At its head sat Vincent Coggins, a man whose reputation was built on a foundation of torture, blackmail, and unexplained disappearances. The man inside the house kept his mouth shut to the police, but in the underworld, word moves faster than law enforcement. Someone, somewhere, knew exactly what had just been taken, and more importantly, they knew the terrified father, who would step forward to pay the price. This is the story of a man who paid £1.3 million to save his son from a murder he never ordered, and the criminal empire that took the cash but still demanded blood. It started with that white van on Crockdale Road. The gang had been watching the house for weeks, tracking the movements, learning the routine. They knew exactly what was inside. Not people, not family heirlooms, but product stacks of it. At 9:30 a.m. on May 23, 2020, they made their move. The front door was answered by Paul Glenn and his son. There was no conversation. Within seconds, machetes were drawn. Glenn was slashed viciously, the blade cutting deep to the bone in a warning strike that screamed of professional brutality. His son tried to fight back, desperate to protect his father, but he failed. Blood coated the hallway. The house, indistinguishable from the outside, was a high-volume depot, and today it was being emptied. The raiders loaded up 30 kilograms of cocaine, a street value of over £1 million, and vanished into the morning traffic. What these robbers did not fully grasp was the sheer scale of the hornet's nest they had just kicked. This was not just a stash house, it was a central artery for the Huyton Firm, a cartel built over decades by brothers Vincent and Francis Coggins. Their supply lines stretched from the coca fields of South America to the ports of Spain, and finally to the streets of the UK. Stealing from them was considered a death wish. By 7:41 that same evening, Vincent Coggins was already watching the footage of the raid. CCTV pulled directly from a neighbor's system. He watched the 4 masked men, the waiting van, and his stock disappearing. Coggins did not just get angry. He exploded. To his associates he made it clear, this attack was personal. In his mind, no local crew would be insane enough to touch him unless they had inside information. He was convinced this was an inside job, executed by someone cocky enough to rob the Huyton Firm and think they could live to spend the money. He wanted names, and he wanted them immediately. The reality was that the robbers were not even from Liverpool. They were a crew from Salford, led by Jason and Craig Cox, aided by a local traitor. But Coggins did not know that yet. Blinded by rage and a bruised ego, the Huyton Firm was about to go hunting, and they were aiming their sights at the completely wrong man. Vincent Coggins did not hesitate. He wanted retribution, and he wanted it yesterday. Within hours of the robbery, he was active on EncroChat, the encrypted communication network used by elite criminals, operating under the handle Moonlit Boat. His tone was measured, cold, and utterly lethal. He instructed his lieutenants Paul Woodford, Robert Jarvis, and Michael Earl to start digging. The order was clear: burn down every rumor until someone confessed. If they could not find the thief, they would make someone pay regardless. First, the name Kenny Glenn, the victim's son, was floated. Then, Paul Flynn. But then, silence, followed by a sudden, terrifying shift. Out of nowhere, Coggins fixated on a different local dealer entirely, Brian Maxwell Jr. There was no link, no motive, no physical presence at the scene. But Maxwell Jr. was young, calculated, and operated discreetly close to his father. To a paranoid mind like Coggins, that was enough. He messaged his crew, claiming he had Maxwell nailed, and made it chillingly clear that the stolen money was no longer the priority. What he wanted now was blood. When Woodford asked if they needed weapons, Coggins replied that he had already stocked up. They were ready, armed, and waiting. He specifically requested a pineapple street code for a hand grenade. Jarvis confirmed one could be sourced. They were no longer just guessing. They were preparing for an execution. The plan was simple. Locate Maxwell Jr., hit him fast, and make a violent example that would echo across Merseyside. Brian Maxwell Sr. was not a name the general public knew, but in the drug world his reputation was solid. He was a different breed of criminal, a quiet operator who shunned the chaos of street gangs. He did not run hit squads. He ran houses. Dozens of them. He bought cheap properties, rented them out, and converted them into large-scale cannabis factories. They were masterpieces of deception. Lights on timers, lawns mowed weekly, gardeners paid to hang flower baskets, just to make the homes look lived in. Inside, however, was a different world. Upstairs, floors were stripped bare, walls packed with grow tents, and heat lamps shielded from thermal cameras. It was not showy, but it was incredibly efficient. His son, Brian Jr., had grown up in this trade, trusted to move product and handle logistics, but when Maxwell Sr. heard the whispers that his son was being blamed for the £1 million robbery of the Coggins stash house, the blood ran cold in his veins. He demanded the truth from his boy. Maxwell Jr. had proof, CCTV footage from his own home showing he had not left the house that day. The timestamps were clear, but Maxwell Sr. knew the streets better than that. He knew that to men like Vincent Coggins, the truth was irrelevant. The name had stuck, the ego had been bruised, and there was now a price on his son's head. Innocence was not a shield against a hand grenade, so the father made a decision that only a parent in that world could make. He knew Coggins was a businessman, albeit a violent one. A deal could be struck if the number was high enough. He told his son to stay hidden and open negotiations through a mutual associate. The offer was staggering. Land, houses, and cash, totaling over £1.3 million. He was not asking for forgiveness or justice. He was simply buying his son's breath. Coggins agreed, at least on paper. On June 3, 2020, the transaction was completed. The titles were transferred. The money passed. Maxwell Sr. believed he had bought peace. He was wrong. Behind the scenes, Coggins was still venting his rage across EncroChat. He told his inner circle that he had accepted the deal, but nothing had actually changed. Maxwell Jr. was still marked for death. Coggins messaged that they would leave the dad alone for now, but his plan was cold and patient. Wait for the heat to die down, wait for the police to look away, and then finish what had started. The money was just a bonus. The murder was still on the schedule. So far, we have seen the fury of the gang and the desperation of the victims. But to understand why the deal between Maxwell and Coggins was never going to hold, you have to look at the third player in this game, the Invisible Watchers. Like all long-standing syndicates, it was not paranoia that eventually brought the Huyton Firm down. It was confidence. It was the arrogance of believing that no one was watching and that their bespoke, £1, 500 a year encrypted phones were unbreakable. They were wrong. In early April 2020, French and Dutch authorities achieved the impossible. They hacked into the EncroChat network. Instead of shutting it down immediately, they quietly copied the messages in real time. This intelligence was passed directly to the UK's National Crime Agency and the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. Suddenly, the police were not just looking at historical data. They were effectively sitting in the room with the gangsters. Over 72,000 messages were gathered under what became known as Operation Subzero. Every threat, every drug deal, every order for violence was being logged. Handles like Moonlit Boat Coggins, Soft Herb and Blade Hedge were slowly but surely tied to real-world identities, often because the criminals got sloppy sharing photos of their dogs, their cars, or even their reflections in mirrors. What started as a surveillance operation quickly turned into a high-stakes race against time. Inside the command centers, detectives were watching a live feed of a murder conspiracy. They saw Vincent Coggins demand a grenade. They saw the order to burn down rumors. They saw the price put on Brian Maxwell Jr. Many as head, the threats extended to two other men as well, Michael Eves and Ayaborsa Igbenovia. By late May 2020, the threat was not just digital bluster. It was imminent. The police were faced with a critical dilemma. Do they wait to gather more evidence for a slam-dunk conviction? Or do they move now to save a life? They chose life. On May 27, 2020, officers arrived at Brian Maxwell Jr.'s hiding spot. They served him with an Osman warning, a grim, official document issued by the police when they have intelligence of a credible threat to life that they cannot prevent by other means. It effectively tells the recipient, someone is trying to kill you right now. Officers issued similar warnings to the other targets, but they did not stop there. They executed the second half of their strategy, serving disruption notices directly to Vincent Coggins, Paul Woodford, Michael Earl, and Robert Jarvis. These notices were a direct shot across the bow, formally warning the gangsters that law enforcement was aware of their feud and watching their every move. It was a tactic designed to stall the plot, to freeze the gears of the murder machine. And for a moment, it worked. Michael Earl appeared unnerved by the pressure and backed off, but Vincent Coggins was different. He was too deep in his own power trip to stop. Behind the scenes, he told his crew to sit tight, believing he could outweight the police surveillance. He did not realize that the disruption notices were not just warnings, they were the final nails in his coffin. As the firm tried to play it cool, the investigation moved into its terminal phase. The police had seen enough. The arrests were coming, and the empire built on fear was about to face a force it could not intimidate. For weeks, the Huyton Firm had been obsessed with Brian Maxwell Jr., a man whose only crime was having a successful father and a similar name to a rumor. But while Coggins was busy planning the murder of an innocent man, the real thieves were already counting the cash. As it turned out, the call was coming from inside the house. The robbery was not the work of a rival Liverpool gang or a cocky local dealer. It was executed by Jason and Craig Cox, two brothers from the Salford underworld. But they could not have done it alone. They needed eyes on the ground. That is where Richard Caswell came in. Caswell was a seasoned criminal, a known associate of the firm, and a man Vincent Coggins thought was on his side. After the robbery, Caswell had played the role of the loyal soldier perfectly. He spoke to the firm, feigning ignorance, claiming he was asking around to help find the culprits. In reality, he was feeding the firm's fury back to the Cox brothers, helping them stay one step ahead of the retaliation. It was a staggering betrayal. Coggins, the man who prided himself on knowing everything that moved in Liverpool, was being played by one of the few men he let into his circle. But lies in the underworld have a shelf life, and Caswell's expired the moment the EncroChat data was decrypted. The police did not just see the threats from Coggins. They saw the setup from Caswell. His messages revealed him as the architect of the robbery, the inside man who tipped off the Salford crew about the stash house location. When this truth finally leaked out, the retribution was swift and savage, though not from Coggins directly. Caswell, already in custody for another matter, was slashed across the face inside prison. The Cox family received threat-to-life warnings. Their properties in Salford were firebombed. Jason and Craig Cox fled the country, hiding out in Spain and leaving the chaos they caused behind them. By the time Coggins realized the truth that he had extorted £1.3 million from an innocent father, while the real traitor sat right under his nose, it was too late. The police had seen enough. The blueprint of the Huyton Firm was complete. Every message, every photo, every transaction had been mapped. Operation Subzero moved from surveillance to strike. At 6:00 a.m. on June 16, 2020, the silence of the lockdown morning was shattered. Across Liverpool and Knowsley, armoured police vehicles screeched to a halt outside luxury homes and secure compounds. There were no warnings, no polite knocks. Doors were blown off their hinges. Armed officers flooded into the bedrooms of the men who thought they were untouchable. Vincent Coggins, Robert Jarvis, Paul Woodford, and Michael Earl were dragged out in handcuffs, their encrypted phones seized as evidence. The dismantling of the firm was total. It was not just the leadership. The net was cast wide. In the days that followed, the secondary tier, Paul Fitzsimmons, Kevin Rimmer, Dean Burrows, and Darren Tierney, was scooped up. Even the victims were not spared from the law's reach. Brian Maxwell Sr. and Jr. were arrested, their desperate ransom payment now viewed as evidence of their own criminal profits. In Amsterdam, Paul Glenn, the man who had been slashed in the initial robbery, was tracked down and extradited. The empire that had taken 30 years to build, cementing its power through fear and silence, had been utterly dismantled in less than 30 minutes. The fall of the Huyton Firm did not end with handcuffs. It ended with a gavel. For decades, Vincent Coggins and his inner circle had operated as ghosts, their crimes insulated by layers of fear and silence. But in the cold light of the courtroom, stripped of their terrifying reputation, they were just men facing a mountain of digital evidence. The sheer volume of data harvested from the EncroChat hack, over 72,000 messages, was unprecedented. The defense teams fought tooth and nail to have the evidence thrown out, arguing it was obtained illegally. But the judges stood firm, ruling the data admissible. That ruling did not just seal the fate of the Coggins brothers. It set a legal precedent that would topple hundreds of other criminal networks across the UK. It took over 3 years to bring the sprawling case to its full conclusion. But when the sentences were handed down, they were shattering. Vincent Coggins, the 58-year-old mastermind who had ordered grenade attacks and directed multi-kilo drug deals from behind a screen, received 28 years in prison. His right-hand man, Robert Jarvis, who was once thought to be a mere enforcer but was revealed as central to the operation, was handed 25 years. Paul Woodford, the man ready to source firearms and arrange hits, got 24 years and 6 months. The hierarchy that had ruled Merseyside's underworld for 30 years was wiped out in a single afternoon. The sword of justice swung just as hard against the men who started the chaos. The robbers, Jason and Craig Cox, along with the traitor Richard Caswell, were jailed under a separate investigation, dubbed Operation Jail. Jason Cox received over 14 years, while Caswell, the inside man whose betrayal sparked the war, was handed 7 years. But perhaps the most twisted irony of the entire saga was reserved for the Maxwells. Brian Maxwell Sr. had paid a fortune to save his son's life, believing he was buying their freedom from the gang. Instead, that payment became the smoking gun that destroyed them. The court viewed the £1.3 million ransom not as the act of a desperate father, but as undeniable proof of vast criminal profits. You do not have £1 million in cash lying around unless you are part of the trade. Brian Maxwell Sr. was jailed for 13 years for conspiracy to supply cannabis. His son, Brian Maxwell Jr., received 18 years and 2 months. A sentence heavily influenced by his decision to arm himself with assault rifles while in hiding. And the money, the £1.36 million that Maxwell Sr. handed over to Coggins, was never returned. It was seized by the state under the Proceeds of Crime Act. The Maxwells lost the cash, they lost their freedom, and the peace they tried to buy never really existed. This case stands as a grim monument to the modern drug trade. It stripped away the glamour of the gangster lifestyle, revealing a world where loyalty is sold for a price, where innocent fathers are forced into impossible choices, and where the most feared men in the city can be brought down by their own text messages. The Huyton Firm believed they were invincible, protected by technology and terror. In the end, they were just another case file. If you have followed this story from the first slash of the machete to the final slamming of the cell door, we want to hear your thoughts. Did the sentences fit the crimes? Was justice served for the Maxwells? Or were they victims of a situation that spiraled out of control? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into real UK crime stories like this, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. There is always another case to uncover.